Today on episode 93, I want to talk to you about those times when you feel like you're just done with your teaching situation or maybe just teaching in general. And some of you may be thinking, okay, wait a minute, Kim, I just started teaching. Why all of this negative talk? Well, while this may be true for most of you, there are still some that are already overwhelmed and just over it all and are wondering what to do next. So today, I wanted to give you some options aside from quitting teaching altogether that may make teaching more enjoyable and keep you in the field.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Lepre.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Lepre, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Thanks for joining me today. I am excited to be back after a short break. I hope you're having a restful winter break and are taking advantage of this time to recharge and reset for second semester. Now, this episode is brought to you by the New Educator Weekend North in Santa Clara, California. From February 21st to the 23rd, the California Teachers Association is holding a conference, and it couldn't come at a better time. One way to get yourself in the right mindset for second semester is to plan some professional development to refine your teaching practices. And luckily, this conference is just for new teachers like you. So why should you go to this conference? Well, first, the registration fee is ridiculous. It's only $49 if you're a California Teachers Association member and $10 if you're a student CTA member. So if you're still getting your credential, super cheap. And this gets you into the conference session. You get Friday dinner, Saturday breakfast and lunch, and Sunday brunch. And you guys, I went to the one in San Diego at the beginning of December. They feed you really, really well. And there's even an evening party with free drinks, and it's just a good time for everyone. So it's basically a steal how much you're paying for this conference. And, if you go, you can earn up to 2 units of university credit from Cal State University Chico Department of Ed, and it's only $60 a unit. You can also get up to 15 hours of professional growth credit at no cost if you're a CTA member. So again, such a steal. And I know you guys got to get those credits so that you can move over on the pay scale. And finally, you get to meet me. I'll be there representing the podcast as well as presenting. So be sure to head over to teachersneedteachers.com/conference to sign up for the upcoming Santa Clara conference on February 21st to the 23rd.
I'm Amber Harper from the Burned In Teacher Podcast and a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
So at the time of this recording, most of us have just survived one semester and finished 1 week of winter break. During this past week, you may have been lamenting about going back to school, even though you still have about another week left. This is pretty much how 99% of teachers feel. But, there may be something more lurking there. You may be wondering if teaching is still right for you. You may have hated that first semester for a variety of reasons that seem beyond your control. Maybe you still love teaching, but there's just something that's making it less enjoyable or less fulfilling, and you can't really figure out what to do. In all transparency, I've had these thoughts and gone through this questioning process quite a few times in my career, and it's completely normal, you guys. The problem is when these thoughts lead us down the path of quitting teaching. Now, you may know a lot of people who have quit teaching, and they're quite happy. But I bet you know more people that are stuck in teaching for whatever reason and are miserable. And perhaps at this moment, you don't want to quit, but you don't know if you want to stay. So what do you do? So today I'm going to discuss the different times I've felt stuck in teaching and what I did to get myself out of my rut. So after my first 2 years of teaching, I moved to San Diego to be with my husband. My first job here was the exact job that I told myself I never ever wanted to have, which is high school marching band. I taught it in my second student teaching experience and hated it. I knew I wasn't cut out for it, but it was honestly the only way to get my foot in the door in my district. You see, there weren't a lot of options around me, and it was getting dangerously close to the beginning of the school year. So when I got the call to interview for a high school band job, I put on my big girl pants, sucked it up, and went for it. I was surprised that I even got the job because I could tell that the principal interviewing knew that I didn't really want to teach it, but they were desperate, and so was I. And the school year was about to start, so there I was, getting the job. During those 2 years at the high school, I learned a lot about myself and my abilities as a teacher. I learned that I could connect with pretty much any age, but I was also kind of still immature, my early 20s. I got stuck in that mindset of wanting to be friends with my students since they weren't that much younger than me. And, that didn't really pan out for me. I mean, yes, they liked me, but they didn't really respect me. I also knew that I was a terrible high school band teacher. I really didn't know what I was doing, and you could tell based on how my band sounded. And I knew that I didn't want to do it anymore, and I had even entertained the idea of leaving teaching. But you may be thinking this as well. I'd spent so much money just to get my credential, and honestly, no other job sounded interesting to me at the time. So instead, I looked for a new school to teach at. 2 years into the high school band job, a middle school position opened, which is what I really wanted. So I immediately jumped at the opportunity, and luckily I had an in with the current band teacher there who was moving up to the high school level. So changing schools really helped me get through that first bump in the road when I was doubting whether or not I should stay. It may not seem like an option for you, especially, if you're in a more rural area and there aren't a lot of schools around you, or perhaps the only option would be to move, and you can't do that for a variety of reasons. But, if you're thinking of leaving the profession, I urge you to first try to change schools and see if a different environment will make a difference. I did this again about 4 years ago when I was really starting to feel stuck at my previous school, and I jumped at the opportunity to transfer to a nearby middle school, and it really invigorated me and sparked a period of creativity and innovation in my teaching. You definitely want to consider switching schools if you're in a toxic environment. Sometimes poor administration, factions and cliques in your school, low morale, and in general, just a lot of negativity can take a toll on your mentality and your teaching, especially as a new teacher. This is the time in your career when you need a lot of support. So if you dread going to work but love being in the classroom with kids, then changing schools is a really good solution. Also, you might have noticed that I went from teaching high school to middle school. So I also suggest considering teaching a different grade level. After a while, teaching the same material year after year gets boring. And even if you mix up your lessons and activities, you may get tired of the same standards, the same issues, and basically the same thing over and over again. I tried this after teaching 7th grade English for 5 years, and I decided to try 8th. It was definitely a challenge for me, and it kept me on my toes. And you know what? I realized that I didn't like it and switched back to 7th the following year, but it was enough of a change for me to want to try new things in my teaching and keep me satisfied with my work. So back to teaching band. After teaching it for 9 years, I started to get restless again. I wanted something different, and I also wanted to make more money. I'm sure you can relate. So I decided that it was a good time for me to get my master's degree. I've always been a good student, and I figured that learning some new techniques could help me become a better teacher. So I researched different programs, talked to my colleagues, and finally settled on getting my master's online through National University. It was a very, very intensive program. And I was writing like 2 to 3 essays per weekend, in addition to reading and participating in online group discussions. And of course, I was still teaching. But getting my master's gave me a sense of purpose and something to mix up the monotony of teaching. Yes, It was difficult and time consuming. And yes, it was expensive and I had to take out loans, but it also ensured that my future step increases in pay and that my pension would be higher. So this could be an option for you as well if you're starting to get tired of teaching already. On the one hand, you might think I'm crazy to suggest this because you already have so much on your plate just figuring out teaching. But at the same time, you're also not too far off from college if you just got your credential. So I bet your studying and writing chops are still pretty good. And perhaps there's an avenue of teaching that you'd really like to refine, like incorporating technology or perhaps curriculum and development. These can give you a different focus, and while you're going through the program, your teaching will naturally change and improve. Now, if you're further along and have been teaching for more years, I suggest considering national board certification or maybe getting your administrative credential. While I haven't done either of these, it's the same idea as getting your master's. The coursework will help you make more money while also improving your teaching. There are requirements to even apply, such as needing to teach for a minimum of 3 years before applying for board certification. So be sure to look those up if you want to go down that road. So not long after I got my master's, and this will be 10 years into teaching band, I, again, got really bored and over all of the time spent outside of school for performances and practices, all of the planning, fundraising, instrument inventory, and things like that are all involved with teaching music. But getting my master's also opened my eyes to aspects of teaching that at the time really didn't seem to apply to band. One of them was technology integration. So at the time, there wasn't much that we could do with tech in the band room aside from having students go into a practice room and record themselves playing. And I really started thinking about helping students with literacy, communicating through writing, and of course, using technology. I always had a knack for helping my students with their English homework, and yes, they would come to me puzzled about something, and especially with explaining grammar in a way that was understandable. So after talking to one of my good friends who was an English teacher at my school, as well as my principal, I decided that I was going to take the test to get my English single subject credential. This required a lot of studying since I wasn't an English major. I mean, it was so brutal, and there were areas of English lit that I was really unfamiliar with and really had to study up on. But I passed, and my principal had a position ready for me. So another way to reignite your passion for teaching is to maybe consider teaching a different subject. Yes, it'll be tough in the beginning as you're figuring out the standards, the expected outcomes, etc., but that new challenge can really put teaching into a whole new perspective. Also, having a new team or PLC can also change things up for you and open your eyes to new ways of teaching and thinking about delivering content. When I taught band, I was the only visual and performing arts teacher at my school, and while I would meet with other elective teachers during PLC, it's just not the same. But when I switched to English, it gave me this new sense of purpose in seeing how that PLC functioned, and that really helped me up my game. Plus, I was able to use everything that I'd learned about educational technology from my master's program, because shortly after the switch, my district went to a one-to-one iPad model. So maybe there's a subject that you're also good at or not too bad at, you can consider maybe trying to teach that subject. So a few years into teaching English, I started to get restless again. Can you see a pattern here? But this time, it was different. I was beginning to really question how I ran my classroom, particularly when it came to grading. I'd heard about standards-based grading, but I couldn't wrap my brain around how it would work in my classroom. So I researched it, and I started small. I started by really examining my gradebook and reflecting on what it communicated about my students. I also decided to start small and only do partial standards-based grading, where some assignments were graded on a 1 through 4 scale and others were based on points. Now, it's taken a long time to come up with something that makes sense for me, and I'll be honest, it's never the same year after year. But trying something new in my classroom kept me from getting bored and wanting to leave the profession. This also applies to me integrating technology into my teaching. It was foreign and I fumbled through it in the beginning, but it gave me a different focus rather than just the same lessons over and over again. So for you, this might be something like changing your grading, switching up texts that you use to teach certain standards, researching different activities for how you teach concepts. Maybe you're a math teacher and you want to try out open middle math, which I discussed with Robert Kaplinski in episode 86. I mean, just try something new and different, even if you're on a scripted curriculum. Mix in some different types of activities, and you'll most likely forget about your dissatisfaction with teaching. Another way I've mixed things up is by applying for additional positions at my school. So my district added curriculum specialists for all of the core subject areas, as well as one for blended learning, which was for integrating technology. I've applied for and have been both the English curriculum specialist and the blended learning specialist. So just like switching up your teaching, taking on a position like this can also give you a renewed sense of purpose. And you may be thinking, I'm just a new teacher. Why would they hire me for that? You have more to offer than you know. And if you don't get it now, that doesn't mean you won't be perfect for it in the future. There are many districts that have teachers on special assignment, or they're called TOSAs for short, who fulfill different roles as needed. So if you're feeling stale and wondering if it's time to exit, maybe consider throwing in your hat for one of these types of positions. While you may not get this particular one, if your administrator knows you're interested in doing some additional work like this, they might have you in mind for something else that comes along the way. Finally, a great way to get pumped up about teaching is to attend conferences. I admittedly didn't do much of this or enough of this due to money, but now there's donors choose, and so many people have had their registration or other fees funded through this. I even know of people who had their registration, hotel, and meals funded through this. There are so many inspiring conferences like Teach Your Heart Out, Get Your Teach On, Teacher Self-Care, the new Educator Weekend that I talked about in the beginning of this episode. There are also a ton of grade and subject-specific ones, so whatever you choose, you can empty and refill your cup by attending a conference and being around like-minded teachers. I swear by this, and I'm already planning to attend more conferences this year. So as you can see, I've wanted to leave teaching many times, but instead I found other ways to keep myself motivated. I don't want you to think that I've been this happy-go-lucky teacher for the past 18 years and have been in bliss the entire time. Whether it's a change of environment, grade, or subject, a distraction like getting your master's, trying on different hats, or investing in professional development, there are ways to keep your mojo with teaching. And since you're just starting out and you've invested so much time, effort, and money to get here, you owe it to yourself to try to make it work. Having a career in teaching is in many ways like being in a relationship. You get bored and tired of it, frustrated, and sometimes hate it after a while, but that doesn't mean that you have to call it quits. I've always been a believer in doing my best to work things out and not just walk out. I think that's a huge part of adulting. Does this mean that you'll reach your 18 like me? No, not necessarily, but you'll at least know you did everything you could to make it work, and you won't have the guilt of being a quitter. If you try some of these and realize that teaching really isn't for you, you can leave knowing for sure that it's time to go and have absolutely no regrets. So I hope you found this useful. If anything I mentioned touched a chord or you want to discuss your situation with me, please feel free to email me at kim@teachersneedteachers.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter with the handle Kim Lepre. That's one word. And I'd love to connect with you and help you out in any way that I can. Thanks for hanging out with me today, you guys. Have a fabulous week.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.